The purpose of the story is to display for us this, that at Christmas, the world celebrates the wisdom of God. Now, by Christmas, I don't mean this coming Wednesday. I'm talking about the first Christmas, the Advent, the time in Bethlehem when these events occurred. And here in Matthew come the intelligentsia of the age, the elites who represent Gentile culture, the world's cultures. They represent the world's wisdom coming to this child, celebrating this child, acknowledging that true wisdom and authority are found in this child, in Jesus Christ. Paul even tells us more about that in terms of what he says in 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? How was the wisdom of the world made foolish? Well, through this child that these wise men had traveled to see, a child not born in celebration, not born with pomp and circumstance and glory, but born humble and needy. The wisdom of the world says, you honor those who are elevated already. If they've done something great, then they're worthy of honor. But God says, no. No, he hasn't done anything yet, but I'm going to honor him anyways because of who he is. He's humble and meek. And that's who is low and despised in this world, even things that are not to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. And I think that's really the subtext beneath the text for what Matthew is doing in his gospel. Here is a king that nobody would recognize as the king. Herod had no idea that a king had been born under his watch. In fact, if he had, he would have killed him immediately. It's only those who had their eyes open. Getting back to that very first sermon in this series. It's only those who were carefully watching, carefully seeing what God was doing, that even knew what was going on or suspected it. Nobody else even saw the star, apparently. See, these men, though, were the learned men. They were the trained intelligentsia. They were the elites. Remember what we saw in Acts chapter 13? Bar Jesus was advising the proconsul. Why? Well, because these people who practiced these kinds of arts were considered wise to have in your hip pocket if you were a leader. They could accomplish stuff. They could do stuff. They knew stuff. But how could people like that, people who practiced mysticism, be considered intelligentsia, even in that age? I mean, they were smart people. Of course, we ask that from our modern scientific wisdom of the day. You know, you do realize that the wisdom of the day is constantly shifting. Like what we thought was smart 40 years ago, people today go, well, that's dumb. How could you possibly have thought that? And 40 years from now, we'll think the same thing about what we're thinking today. Let me give you an example of what that looks like in terms of our viewpoints and all of our scientific wisdom and how it is constantly shifting. Just look at the nature versus nurture debate in sociology. Like right now, what the elites, the people that are in the know, the people that are driving all of the papers that are being written, what they're all saying is that everything essential about yourself, about your desires and your passions, those are all genetically fixed. You're a product of your genetics. You can't help your desires. That's what's being taught right now. Now that goes counter to everything that was being taught 40 years ago. And give it 40 years from now, and I guarantee you that's all going to shift again. As soon as the intelligentsia, the elites of society, discover how inconvenient it is that a person can't change themselves. And they realize they've boxed themselves into a corner of being only one thing and they can't be anything else. And they suddenly say, no, you can change yourself. And then we'll be back to nurture again in the debates. As C.S. Lewis once put it, all that is not eternal is eternally out of date. I like that quote. And so we see that the wisdom of today is not at is not all that different really from the first century. Yes, we've learned some things. Yes, our mathematics are better. Yes, science has improved. But believe me when I say that all that is not eternal is eternally out of date. We want the eternal. That's what we seek. We talked about Christology, for instance, last week, and I realized, in midweek that maybe I didn't make it clear what I meant by Christology. People might say, that's a big word, I don't know what that means. Well, what's Christology? Christology is simply the doctrine of the person, nature, and role of Jesus Christ. Boil it down to a simple phrase. Now, the essentials of the Christian faith all basically revolve around that in terms of what we believe, because it is the most fully formed doctrine that we have from the very earliest of times. We talked about last week that it was basically a fully formed doctrine at the time that Peter gives his very first sermon. That's day one of the church. And it was certainly absolutely fully formed by the time the last apostle passed. That's John, by the way. But there have been nuances that have been argued over in the church, but the basic doctrines of person, nature, and role have remained unchanged from the beginning all the way until this very day. It's incredible, really, when you think about it, at how unchanging that doctrine has been over the history of the church. It's incredible. It's eternal. It's never out of date, and that's why. Because of how foundational it is, Christology, and the nature of Christology and our understanding of it within the church, it is one of those areas that you can most easily spot a cult or a heresy, if you're wondering how to spot one. See, because almost all cults or heresies, that's the one thing that they want to change. They want to change who Christ is. And that's how you can know that they're not Christian at all. They may call themselves Christian, but they're not if they have changed who Christ is. Just look at some of the world's largest religions. That's what they've all done. All of them changed who Christ is. And so it's really easy to spot. And it's easy to spot because of the written records that we have that came from eyewitnesses. And there's no need for us to extrapolate understanding about who Jesus is. Jesus, according to the eyewitnesses, said he was the Messiah. He said that he and the Father were one. He said that he came to fulfill the law. He said that he came to give his life as a ransom. He said that he would die and rise again on 3 days. And then he went out and he did it. And hundreds of witnesses saw this. It is such a solid doctrine. And so that's why when anybody changes it, if you know it, if you understand it, you can spot it immediately. Who do you say Jesus Christ is? And whatever their answer is that going to reveal to you that they're Christian or not? It stands up to every scrutiny of every age and every geographical region that it has been presented. That's eternal. And yet the wisdom of the world is often trying to substitute some other way to save ourselves. Constantly the world is trying to substitute other ways to save ourselves and substitute Christ out. Where is the wise man, the scholar, the philosophy of this age, asked Paul? Well, in the case of the Magi in Matthew 2, if they're really wise, they're looking for God to act, and they're trying to see the signs and understand what he's doing. They're waiting for him to tell them what he's doing, tell them what he's doing. See, these Magi knew that if anything was going to have a lasting effect in the world, it would have to be done by the eternal God. Now, they may not have known him as such, but they knew it deep down in their hearts. And I think that's why there is a desire in our culture today to celebrate Christmas so much. Oh, yes, we try to substitute Christ, put in Santa Claus. But there's still this desire to celebrate Christmas, even by our larger culture. People that don't consider them to be religious will come here on Tuesday nights. Because at Christmas time, the world wants to celebrate the wisdom of God. Because ultimately, the wisdom of the world is shown to be insufficient at Christmas. Now, not all of the world's knowledge and wisdom is baloney. You know better than that. By God's common grace, there's all sorts of things that scientists and philosophers that have said that will abide eternally because they're true. And they've discovered them maybe through chance. I don't know. Maybe it's the grace of God, as I said, a general grace of God that brought it to them. But there is wisdom in the wisdom of this world. But what you need to understand about the wisdom of the world is that it will always fall short. It has to, by definition. It will always fall short of the complete narrative. It may give you a satisfactory answer for a great many things, but it will never give you a satisfactory answer for why you are here. It's always going to be insufficient for you to find peace. The world's wisdom is insufficient for you to find lasting meaning in your life. No, we can substitute other things, and we can pretend, we can lie to ourselves and say, oh, no, I've found lasting meaning. I know what it is. But if you just look at the example of the Magi, these wise men, through all of their arts and learning, they do learn that there's a king coming. I think they understood that. I don't know how they got to that point of understanding that, but they did. But even they can't fill in the whole picture without Scripture. Just look. Where is he who's been born king of the Jews? They say in verse 2. And then Herod gathers around, assembles all the chief priests and scribes of the people, and inquires of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet. So even though a star led them to that point, they saw the light in the sky, they followed it, they recognized that it portended something great, magnificent, but in order to really find what they were looking for, they needed the wisdom of Scripture. Isn't that interesting? Those are things that kind of make me go, If this is like a planetary conjunction that I mentioned earlier, like on May 29th, they see the star, it appears, and they connect that then to all of the rumors and all of the things that they had studied, that there's a great king to come out of Judea, and they travel and they go to Jerusalem, they get to the seat of Judea, they show up and they say, where's the king? I'm sure Herod is like, oh, it's right here. You found him. That's me. That's me. And they're like, no. He was just born. Oh, well, you must mean the Messiah. Oh, then we got to get to the bottom of that. I can't have somebody usurping my role here. But they put two and two together through all of their own reasoning, all of their own understanding. But they found out where to go by listening to the Old Testament prophets. See, Paul tells us in Romans, we can perceive all sorts of things about God. For what can be known about God is plain to them. That's us. Because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. And those of us that have accepted Christ recognize we were without excuse, that we couldn't save ourselves. So we can see all of these things, but we can't get the full picture unless we yield to what Scripture tells us about who Christ is. See, the Magi believed that there were powers at work that were moving history forward. But they couldn't complete the circle of exactly what or who or how until they went to Scripture. See, the wisdom of the world can take you a long ways, but it can't get you all the way home. No major human problem can ever be completely addressed with just human resources. If you're not aware of this, that's a shock to you, but it's true. Because we are not just a conglomeration of influences on each other. We have sin. We have the human heart. We have the human condition. And so as a result, you need the grace of God. It's not just a nice thing. See, science can't solve your discontent. It can't. You need spiritual transformation in your life.